Alright, now that we actually have this guy, let's actually talk about voxels and probes and realistic lighting inside rooms. So let me just mute this guy, and I'm gonna go into my little box right here. Now you can't really see anything, but if I were to turn this into the sun right now, you'll notice that we have a little boy right here, and we have this guy. We also notice that there's not realistic lighting that is being, or shadows that is being reflected inside this room. Normally this part normally gets a little bit darker because the light bounces are not that much. So what are we gonna do? The first things first, before we even do that, right now we're looking at a sun and a very well lit world. So we can already see so many reflections, even though it does not make sense. Now, you'll notice also I have everything set up normally, meaning if I were to throw him outside, he actually has a shadow. But once I throw him inside, there are no shadows. There's not even a little speck of movement in here. So if I were to just, like, let's say create a little omnidirectional in here, it does not really give that much of a lighting. Now you could say it's because of the sun, but because we don't really have proper shadowing, we don't really see that much proper realistic shadows. Now yes, well, now we have our object, and our guy basically has shadows, but this object doesn't. And now we switch this to dynamic, and it does have shadows, but now it's more performance, and then we don't have this shadows here or here or here, so it's just gonna become a headache. So instead what we're gonna do is we're gonna bake lighting for this thing. And before we do that, right now it looks all handy dandy. If I were to remove the sun, you'll notice that it's completely deluminated. It's one of the most darkest things. There's no reflections of the world except this little metal thing that we have. What I did was, when I made this, I have two materials. One is that material you see over here, which is this flat material which has no metal in it, no metallic structure, but it has a high roughness. So if I were to remove the roughness, you'll notice that it has that reflective property like a tile. The more metal I make it, the more reflective it is. But once we do that, we don't even have any reflections. So let's just remove that. While the other one's a complete opposite, being a metal as full and roughness as 0. And that's going to be this one up here and this one on the right. Well, our left, which you barely can see anything in it. So what are we gonna do? Well, this is where voxel probing and environment probing comes in. So let's just press right click, and we go create a light, and we create a voxel probe. I'm just gonna put it right in here, and it's gone into the void. We're gonna put it inside here, and we're gonna make it that it covers this whole thing. So first I'm gonna just change the world light back on, and I'm gonna go into the voxel probe and edit it so it covers this whole room's inner side. So just press edit, you have these options, and then just move it to its side. Once you're done with the size, you can go ahead and bake the lighting. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about the settings. And I'm not going to talk too much, but we have a few settings that are already set, and one of them is the color intensity. This one's more after you start baking it, you'll notice the difference. The attenuation is how much reflection there is. Normally the lower the number, the okay it is. Voxel size is how big these cubes are going to be, or our voxels. The smaller they are, the more memory they take, but the cleaner or the more realistic it is. Normally we just take something like 0.5, 0.4 to 0.5 should be enough. Even 0.3s, we're asking for extra, but 0.4 should be good enough. And that's the size. I'm gonna leave just this much and just have this piece like not show, just so we can see the difference to it. Then the ambient bias that we have is basically how much ambient lighting we can do into it. I'm gonna add a little bit, so just 0.5, and I'm going to add the bicubic filtering on, which if you hover over it, it will tell you what it is, which don't worry about it. Next, we also have the ability to add sky color and additive blending and all the other reflections and stuff. They will make more sense once we actually bake these lightings. Now, what gets baked in lighting? Anything we click on it and it has the lighting mode as static, so in our case is all these objects, and this object has static, it's going to be baked. Now we have our object here as dynamic, it's not going to be baked. But let's look at this light that we have right here. This light, on the other hand, is a static mode. If it's in the static mode, it means it's going to be baked. Now if we were to go down here into mode, we have it mixed and static. Mixed means it's going to affect all dynamic objects' shadows, and it's also going to be inside the baked lighting. So we can turn it on or off depending on your situation. Static means it's not going to be used for simulation, but if we were to bake lighting right now, it's going to be counted inside the baked lighting. Dynamic just means, if we switch it to dynamic, it means it's just there to prove simulation or realistic shadows, and it has nothing to do with baking the lighting. So now that since both of them are dynamic, we press bake all lighting, and it's gonna bake our lighting inside the sun. Now that we saved ourselves so much time, let's actually remove the OmniLight and remove the voxel probe and see the difference. So before, you notice that there is so much light bouncing here, like there is no refractive index, making it more unrealistic. The moment we turn on the light voxel probe, you see that it has shadows, thus making it more realistic into the world. Now if we were to add more blending in the bias of ambience, it basically means how much, let me just do this right here, and then we just move it. We now have the ability to switch out everything. Now bicubic filtering just means how much more realism it is. Sometimes you need the linear for a more cartoonish feeling, or a light or a well-lit room, and then the cubic filtering is more used for like a little less built room. Now your bias, as you go around playing with it, you'll understand that it's about the reflective properties. 0.5 is, as I said, most of the time ideal. Now you have reflections, you can play around with these, but right now we don't really have anything reflective except these two objects, so we can't really see on all of them. But you can already see that once we make the reflective minimum and maximum switch, you can already see the differences with this. And if you do cubic filtering, I'm not going to do that, it's not going to do anything to it. We also have the ability to add the blend, which just means overlap the color upon each other, which makes it unrealistic. And then we have the use sky color, which is a little dangerous because our color of the sky is just dark blue. It's actually black, because if we turn it close, the sky is black. So let's remove this. And now what's the difference between this and what we had before, other than just giving us like a nice lighting? If we were to close our world, you'll notice that we actually have this room lit up exactly like how the world is supposed to be. So what does this mean? It means if you had two different voxels, one for the day and one for the night, so we can just do that right now. We'll just we'll just right click it, clone it. I'm gonna call this one the day one, and the other one the night one. So now we have a light for the day, and I'm just gonna clone this one too. I'm gonna make this one the moon, and now we have the one for the night. So now if we switch, we have one for the day, and we have one for the day, and then we have one for the night, but we didn't bake it yet. So now we can actually bake it with the night and see the differences. So just press bake all lighting. So now we have both night and we have a day. So if you're in the day, your world looks like this, and if you're in the night, your room would look like this. But it's incomplete. And why it's incomplete? Because we don't have reflections of our own objects. Remember how I said I have these two objects as metallic reflectors, meaning they are going to reflect some light. So how do we do this? Well, we actually add something called an environment probe. Now, as voxel probe, if you look into the moon, it's more apparent to realize that it's actually just the moon's light being reflected into this room, and it's just lighting up the room. Now, the problem is the room is dead. It doesn't really have a light. It doesn't have a reflective quality yet. We didn't give it that reflective calculation yet. So what we do is we right click on night, we press create, we go into lights, and now we have something called box projection and sphere projection. We're going to use box because this room is a box. So we're just gonna add it somewhere in this world. I'm gonna let it bake for a second. Once it's done doing auto bake, there's two options you gotta do. First is grab by bake lighting, untick that, and then go over here and untick automatic rebaking so it doesn't piss you off every time. Next, we go up here, we go into positions, and then we reset this position so it's exactly in the same spot as the voxel. Then, you guessed it, you gotta press edit size, and then you gotta make it into its proper sizing. So I'm just gonna put the sunlight back in and do this correctly. Alright, since we are done with that, I'm just gonna put the moon back on, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna let it actually bake again. Once it's done baking, now you'll notice that it actually has a lot of reflections. Now, I didn't put the voxel probe or thing properly, or else it would have had these artifacts. So now you can test and see every time. You'll notice that we have a little mix over here, so we can just put it over here, and then over here it looks like it's clipping through the world, so we're just gonna put it right here, and now we have a little fixed sizing differences. Now if we turn on the light, which we have here, you'll notice it has everything corrected. Now if we turn on the moon and the light, you will see that we actually have everything set up. So if I were to turn off the environment probe and turn off the night, you'll see that the night one has the good reflection, and then the light environment probe actually has the reflection of the moon along with the object mixing. Now we're missing one tiny little thing. Let me just turn this on and turn the light on, and that is proper reflections. Now you'll notice one thing is we have our guy here and we have our little light here. If I were to move my light closer to the thing, you'll notice that it actually reflects perfectly well inside the reflection, but you still can't see the dude. So what do? You add something called a planar probe. Now before we add that, I wanted to go back into the setting, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the settings because, you know, I like talking about settings. We have the ability to get the sun's color, which gives us a very more artifact removal. So if we remove the sun's color, you have those artifacts that just look awkward gone, thus making it a bit more realistic. And then you also have additive blending, but we're not going to use that because there's nothing over here that's like purely reflective. Even these two have a little refraction index that's less. We can open ambience, but right now we didn't bake those yet, so if you're actually going to use it, you have to bake the lighting and do it again. If I just press dynamic, it's gonna set it up, but we're not gonna worry too much about it because we are almost done with almost everything. Now back to what I was saying, and that was the reflection of our little guy right here. So let me move him back here. I guess I'm gonna change his thing to a sphere, and I'm gonna increase the size because it's ridiculous how dead this room looks. Probably around here. And I'm gonna add a mirror here. So how do you add a mirror type object here? So first you just press right click, create, we go back into lights. There's something called a planar reflection probe. And once we click on it, just send it somewhere here. We look at it and we have it facing us. So it's already not looking. Let me just press edit size. Yep, it looks like a mirror on default. What we're gonna do is just do this, drop it all the way until it's touching a reflective object. So in our case, this metal, and then we press edit size. We make it as big as or as small as we want it. And now it is reflecting everything properly. So now we have a room that if I were to close the lights, the night, we have it reflecting everything. So let me just remove this guy, let me remove this guy, and let me remove this. So if we were to look carefully, we have the night voxel probe, which gives us a realistic lighting with the light, and we have the ability to change it by adding more bias into the ambience. I'll just make it full bias, and I'll not use the sky color because the sky color is black. Then we had the ability to add the environment probe, which gave us, wait, let me just mute this one, which gave us the ability to refract using the color. We can remove the sun color and it gives us a proper refraction. And then we added a light planar to give us a mirror-like object. Then we added the moon and we added the light to just show us the final room. So now we have an actual room that's well lit, and it's realistically rendering shadows without actually doing too much calculations. So this is just one room. Imagine you had a whole city filled with these type of rooms that are calculated by baked lighting and everything. The performance is gonna be amazing. Instead of using dynamic shadows all over the time, ruining your performance, making it laggy, now you have the ability to pre-render these shadows for objects, where if a dynamic light, something like a little light right here that's just moving around in the game, decides to come, then you have no problems because you have set up everything correctly. So I have a little two scripts right here. Let me see where my spectator is. All right, it's right here. And if I were to press play now we have an object that's moving around and all the light is working perfectly fine. And then I also have the light moving in a little circle, and you can see the shadows perfectly moving. You see this object, the metallic object, is reflecting really nicely against the room, along with it's reflecting the moon's lighting. And then you also have this mirror-like probe that's showing everything in real time. You have a tiny on this metallic roof, you don't really have that same reflection, but it's still reflecting things because it's close by. So we have everything being simulated properly, and you could see the difference between the voxel probe and the environment probe. When I made the voxel probe, I made it limit to here, and this object was outside the voxel probe. If we were to look back in here, we had the voxel probe just ending itself right here. So if it was the whole thing, you wouldn't be able to see the difference. And it's the same with the environment probe. If I remember correctly, let me just lower the size around here. And now you can see the difference is almost like night and day. So if I were to just remove this and remove this, you'll see the difference almost clearly. So anyways, that's the basics of making realistic lighting and very performant lighting. Until next time, we will be making other stuff soon. Alright, I think I talked enough. I'll see you next time. Good night.